Good morning. Welcome to the Eastman Financial Report. I'm Dan Eastman, your host, and today is Wednesday, February 25th, 2026. Thank you so much for tuning in. As always, we appreciate your viewership here at the Eastman Financial Report, as well as throughout the day on all of the amazing programming you see at worldviewtube.com and here at Worldview Radio. As you know, we are a Christian broadcasting network, and it's our ministry, our mission, our passion, and our goal to bring to that great marketplace of ideas all of the news and information of the day from a Christian perspective. That's really important to us, and that's what this broadcast is all about. And that's what the Eastman Financial Report is all about, being able to bring into that great marketplace of ideas, that great intellectual debate of the media, the Christian perspective on economics and finance. And it's an important part of what we do and have been doing for quite a while. I've been broadcasting for almost 3 years. I guess the first week of March will be my third anniversary. But WVW TV and WorldviewTube.com has been broadcasting since 2006. And this is our, like I said, our ministry, our mission, our passion, and our goal. And if you'd like to help us in that ministry, you can do that by going to worldviewfoundation.com and making a donation. You can also use the address at the bottom of the screen, www.foundation.com, or you can use the handy QR code, and it'll take you right to the website. And of course, you can make a one-time donation, which is very, very much appreciated, or you can sign up for monthly donations, which has the added benefit of flattening our revenue curve so we can better match costs to revenues, keep our bottom line positive, and of course, keep broadcasting our content free of charge. As you know, back 2,000 years ago, the apostles, when wandering about the Middle East, they were sharing the gospel message, and that was not an entertainment venue. That was not, there was no admission fee or a charge. You didn't buy a ticket to go see St. Paul. It was a gift freely given to a very skeptical audience. Well, here we are 2,000 years later, and we're still bringing that gospel message forth to the world through the means of broadcast technology, and we do it free of charge. And if you'd like to help us continue doing that free of charge so we don't burden the public with paywalls and subscriptions, you can do that by making a donation. Of course, any donations are appreciated because it keeps us going, and of course, 2026 is as much a political year as any. We've got the midterm elections coming up, and a lot of issues that are coming forth each day, and we are here to comment on them, again, from a Christian perspective. You can also help this new network by doing business with the vendors you see advertising throughout the day. And of course, we don't sell blocks of advertising time in the traditional sense of a commercial network. Rather, we find companies that we know and trust, and we partner with them so that when they bring their goods and services forth and you purchase them, a small portion of the proceeds comes back to us in the form of a commission, and that also helps us maintain our revenues and keep our content free of charge. So you can help us by doing business with the companies you see advertising throughout the day on our network or broadcasting at Worldview Radio. There's a third way that you can help us as well, and this is a sort of a win-win. It's a real benefit for you as well as for the network. As you know, Brandon House has been doing this broadcast ministry for some period of time, I think 2006, and he's written 15 books, and he's had events and conferences and seminars all around the country, and all of that information has been now digitized, and it lives within a product called The Vault. So if you go to worldviewtube.com/vault, you can subscribe to The Vault, which has amazing on-demand content, and it is a wonderful representation of his Christian ministry. That's worldviewtube.com/vault. The address is on the bottom of the screen. And there is a paywall. Of course, this is a subscription service. But when you think about it, we've all struggled with times in our lives when we need a spiritual boost, or we would really appreciate communion with our fellow Christians. And that's what The Vault does. It brings in a digital format and on-demand basis access to Brandon Howe's entire ministry. So it's a wonderful tool for you to have in your toolbox on days when you'd like it to be a little bit more stimulated by Christian thought and Christian experience. You can just log right in, and it'll really boost you, and it's a wonderful product to have. Also, think about the people in your lives who are struggling. We all have friends and relatives and neighbors who are running through rough patches in life. Maybe there's a financial issue or an illness issue or a family issue or something is causing turbulence, and you think, what can I do for that person to help? Well, one thing you can do is give them the gift of a subscription to the Vault so they too have on demand access to amazing Christian content. And that can be very, very helpful in a person's spiritual journey. So it's something to think about. And it's a great way to help the network as well. Not only do you provide additional revenues to the network, but you have access to great, great spiritual content that is beneficial for yourself as well as friends and neighbors and those you know who could really use a little boost. You can also find the reruns of the Eastman Financial Report within the Vault. So if you're interested in reviewing my work, criticizing my work, or complimenting my work, you can do that. Pay the fee, join the Vault, and then you can have access to some really great financial commentary as well. And if you'd like to come on the show and discuss either pro or con or challenge or whatever, I'm happy to have you, because keep in mind, economics is the dismal science. It's a social science, and it's subject to interpretation. And of course, it's subject to interpretation that's been going on for 2,500 years, since the days of ancient Athens, when people started to debate the hows and whys of how is it that an economy, even 2,500 years ago in Athens, is better or worse than other places. It's a comparative analysis and a comparative science. And of course, we all want a big, robust economy where everybody's doing well, versus an economy where some are and some aren't. And that's been a debate for 2,500 years. So you can see all of that in the Vault. Anyway, that's how you help us out. Make a donation, do business with the vendors you see advertising on our network, and subscribe to the Vault for you and your friends and your family, your neighbors, because that's a great way to help us continue in this wonderful ministry that we have. Well, the big news of the day today, of course, is the State of the Union speech. And it was a brilliant speech. I'm a big fan of President Trump, as you may have suspected by now. And it is truly stimulating and impressive to see powerful leadership. Those of us a bit longer in tooth remember the President Ronald Reagan days. And Ronald Reagan had an amazing ability with a microphone, but he also had courage and his ability to fix a very, very difficult economy that had come out of the 1970s, the chaos of the Vietnam War, the chaos of the President Nixon resignation, the chaos of delinking the American dollar to gold, and then, of course, the absolute chaos of the Jimmy Carter administration, where the world became a very dangerous place, and Iran was lost to multiple generations now of very, very terrorist-driven people, and it was a very difficult time. So, of course, the economy was in shambles. We had the energy shock. We had the Arab oil-producing countries were using oil as a weapon in reaction to Middle East issues, and as a result of that, the economy in the 1970s was really, really bad. High inflation, low growth, very expensive gasoline, a diminution in the quality of automobiles, the blowback from the end of the Vietnam War, the resignation of an American president. It was not the best of times in the United States. And of course, President Reagan stepped into that with his brilliant Treasury Secretary Donald Regan, the Reagan team, who took a hard stick and some strong medicine to the American economy, effectively crushing inflation that was approaching 18% per year, and crushing the economy through raising rates very aggressively to squeeze out the inflation. And then it was morning in America again. And from about 1982 until probably 2007, the American economy just continued to grow and grow and grow. They used strategic tax cuts to stimulate the economy. They repealed the 90% marginal income tax on top incomes, which had been around since World War II. They cut the income tax rates into the low 30s. The economy exploded just as digital technology was happening. And lo and behold, the 80s and the 90s, and then with 9/11, it kind of took a speed bump and zipped along right up until 2007 and 8, when the banking crisis, the latest banking crisis, happened. And we've been sort of limping along ever since. But the point is, that took courage and courageous decisions by a very, very courageous president, Ronald Reagan. And we see that in spades, of course, with President Trump, not only in his first term, and then the term that didn't happen, and then now the second term, but the courage and the drive in the second administration, the second term of this administration, is breathtaking, and it will have very dramatic effects on the American public for a long time to come. But these things take time to do, and of course, given the fiasco of the 2020 election and the unfortunate interregnum, the president is working overtime with some very, very brilliant people, including Secretary of the Treasury Bessent, who is, by all measures, very, very much on top of his game. So the point is, we're entering into a period of time. Of course, we have 1 year into the administration. We've got 3 years left, and then there's the lame duck issue, and then of course what's next, and all of those things always play in the minds of the public as well as Wall Street. But where we are right now is a good place, and I want to highlight some of the economic points that President Trump has made. And one of the first points he made, I'm sure you've all watched the speech, and I'm regurgitating the speech here, but from an economic perspective, and that's what the Eastman Financial Report does, and we take a look at these headlines and we analyze them, but we see the inflation rate is down, and President Trump talked about that. And when we go back over the last consumer price index numbers that I reported, or that were generally released, we see that there are two components of consumer price index. Number one is the headline. That's the big noise. That's the one that the media picks up on. That's the silver minnow that swims across the screen. And then, of course, core, which is all of this market basket of goods and services minus energy and food, because energy and food are very volatile. Well, core came in at a very, very nice low number. I'm blanking. I think it was 2.4%. Headline was a bump up, 2.5. It was a very nice number, well below the 3% inflation, but yet sadly still a little above the 2.0 or the 2% inflation number that the Federal Reserve uses as its dual mandate benchmark. But what it tells us, at least from the reported numbers, that the inflation rate in the United States has calmed down rather dramatically, especially when you look at the 9% inflation we were seeing in that index during the Biden years, which caused everyone to tighten, interest rates to go up, and pretty much slam the housing market back into the Stone Age. So we're seeing inflation down, and that's a good thing. We're also seeing, with the one great big beautiful bill, which is now one great big beautiful law, that the income tax code has been adjusted to favor Americans. Of course, no tax on tips, no tax on overtime, and if you're a Social Security recipient and you fall into the right metrics, you will pay zero or little income tax on your Social Security. And all of that is designed, of course, to get more money in the pockets of the average American. And that's the whole purpose of those highlighting those points. If inflation is low, Americans aren't watching their buying power of their dollar dissipate very fast at all at 2.5. And keep in mind, even the Federal Reserve's bogey of 2%, I often refer to that as sort of the spice in the chili. It would be kind of a bland bowl of chili if there wasn't some spice in it. You need about 2% inflation to just make the economy move forward. And of course, it's still a 2% tax. Over time, it adds up. But without inflation, or if it was a deflationary environment, you would not see economic growth at all. And that's one of the big problems with trying to get to a zero inflation, is that you're really not stimulating the economy. But 2% is sort of in the safe zone. So we see inflation under control, and we see that the taxes are down for many working class people, which is very, very important. And I'll come to that shortly. The third thing he talked about, which is very important, is the tariffs. And of course, this is a beautiful visual. If you watch the State of the Union speech, you see that it's both houses of the Congress, the Senate and the House of Representatives, and the Supreme Court and their military people. Everybody's there. It's the whole American government sitting in the Capitol building, and the president is giving his rendition of the State of the Union. But he took a couple of sharp shots at the Supreme Court for the recent tariff decision. But of course, he also said that he has other tools that he's using, and I did talk about this a couple of days ago, especially it was right after the court decision came out. And keep in mind, that was a limited decision for the IEEPA Act, the 1977 Act, using that act to set a certain number of the tariffs in place. The president used that act as justification when the tariffs went out. The court said probably the Constitution doesn't allow you to create taxes. That's fine. The president has other tariffs in his desk drawer or briefcase, and of course he's used those. That was the 15% for 150 days, and then there's the nuclear power of the 1930 Tariff Act, Smoot-Hartley. So the president is full steam ahead. And he made the comment that if we were to bring in enough tariff revenue, that we wouldn't need an income tax. And I've been talking about this income tax situation quite a bit. And of course, it's still on the president's mind. When you think about the beginnings of the country, it was funded by the sale of land as westward expansion took place, but also tariffs collected in goods brought into the country. And if you go to the East Coast, I spent time in New England, obviously in law school. If you go into Massachusetts, at the Salem and Boston, there's effectively a government building. It was the tariff house, the customs house. And when a ship came into the harbor, well, there was the tax collector collecting taxes on the stuff that was coming in. It's been going on a long time. And at that point, early in American history, the federal government was funded by those two mechanisms: the tariffs coming in, or the customs duties coming in on stuff that was being imported into the United States, as well as the sale of land out west, wherever the West was. They were busy negotiating treaties with the Indians and selling the land to settlers, and that pretty much funded the federal government. And keep in mind, the budget of the federal government was very small, and nobody in the federal government had gotten this idea that you could finance federal operations to eternity running deficits. That was because there weren't any income taxes at the time. So it was basically a tax and spend model. But President Trump's goal, of course, is to get back to that model to eliminate the federal income tax. And I think I mentioned yesterday, I'm in this rather robust discussion group on X talking about remedies. And it is my opinion and my feeling that the federal income tax should not start until you make $500,000 or more a year in income. And I talked about this yesterday. If you go back to the reruns, you'll see that when we started the income tax, there were only a handful of people. It was 0.5% of Americans who were even bothered or burdened by an income tax. This was a soak the rich bill. And there were only 358,000 people who actually filed a tax return, because everybody in America, if you made money, you get to keep your money and you spend your money the way you want it. Now, there were local taxes, and there always will be local taxes, because at some point you got to pay for the bridges and the highways and the playgrounds and whatever you're spending money on. But from the federal perspective, that income tax was sold to the American public as a tax on the rich. And of course, today, we're at February 25th. We're going to be doing income taxes between now and April 15th. And everybody knows that this has become a crushing burden. So if we can eliminate the income tax for those making $500,000 or less a year, you will fundamentally change America in a good way by letting everybody just keep their money. Then you don't have to worry about tax on tips, tax on overtime, tax if you're a Social Security recipient. None of this would matter. And it would only affect about 99.2% of the American public wouldn't be filing anything. Now, it's kind of sad that 99% of Americans don't make $500,000 a year. We're supposed to be the richest nation on earth. But the reality is it would liberate the vast American population without having to do much of anything other than raising the exemption to $500,000. You say, well, what about the loss in revenue to the federal government? So what? They just print and sell bonds. It doesn't stop them now. There's $38.7 trillion in bonds floating around. They have deficit spending that goes at $2.5 trillion a year, and now they're arguing about a cap. They don't want to increase that more than 3%. They're not talking about balanced budget. So just stop the hypocrisy and just free the American people. And if the federal government wants to run itself off the rails and go broke, we have 50 state governments. That's the point. I have to take a break here, and I'll be back. I want to finish some of the other thoughts on the speech. I'll be right back. Thanks.
Hello, I'm Brandon House. Would you like to gain access to over 20 years of my radio shows, TV shows, my books? I've written 15 books, and most of those books are ebooks now, and we have conference DVDs, conferences where we filmed our conferences at the Ozarks literally starting 20 years ago. It's all available in our archived vault. All you have to do is go to worldviewtube.com/vault, worldviewtube.com/vault, and for a reasonable monthly fee, you gain access to over 20 years of Christian worldview programming, news, information, books, documentaries, and a powerful search engine. And folks, it's a great way not only to educate yourself, equip yourself, but it's a big way that you can help fund our continuation as a broadcast network. Please check it out. worldviewtube.com/vault, worldviewtube.com/vault, and help us continue pushing out a Christian worldview.
Okay, so I'm back. So I was talking about the State of the Union address, talking about my hypotheses of a $500,000 exemption for income, either personal W-2 income or small business Schedule C income, and that would liberate the American people. And of course, if President Trump's tariff revenue were to cover that gap, it would be a good thing. But if it doesn't cover the gap, then in essence, it doesn't matter given Congress's lack of ability to live within its means. It doesn't matter. And as a matter of fact, some of the Republican thinkers about 2 years ago were coming up with an idea to eliminate the income tax and just have the Federal Reserve print a budgeted amount of money and pump that into the federal government, which would spend it on whatever the government spends its money on, and in effect create money and put it into the federal government and trickle it out into the society. And that's how the federal government would be funded, with brand new dollars. So the federal government would become the allocator of additional money or currency into the system. Now, it's quite controversial and everybody laughed. No, they didn't quite see it. But what we're looking at today is an income tax or a federal revenue model that is broken. You can't run government deficits at $2.5 trillion a year, and threaten to put the whiskey bottle on the higher shelf so it's 3%. That's all nonsense. But what they're doing is increasing the national debt to infinity. And of course, we know that the one big beautiful law actually increased the debt ceiling from the $38 trillion that it hit back in November, December to $41 trillion. Well, here we are, $38.7 trillion, and it's only February. So we're off to the races on that. The point is, what the administration is doing is looking at alternatives. And that's what progressivism is all about. I love my Democrat friends, they're progressive. Well, progressive doesn't mean stuck in 1913 income tax. Progressive means coming up with a better way to fund the American government that liberates the American people. We don't need people doing quarterly withholding or every 2-week paycheck withholding. We don't need filing an income tax return. So many Americans that I talk to are just gleeful on April 15th. Oh, I got so much money back from the federal government, big refund. I said, no, you lent them the money, and instead of, if you buy federal bonds, they pay you interest. The federal bonds pay interest. But if you overpay your taxes, it's 0% interest loan to the federal government. So you've effectively lent your money to the government for a year or part of the year for free. You don't get it. That's a big check. You get it just a cash basis versus accrual basis. That's basically the way a lot of Americans look at that. And of course, because of the lack of sophistication in the American psyche for understanding finance and for understanding business and understanding economics and even government, it's something that should be changed for the protection of the people. And I think President Trump's on the right path here. It'll be interesting to see what he can get done. And hopefully we will find a Congress that will have some sympathy for the American public rather than just themselves. The last thing I want to talk about in his speech that caught my ear, and I think I've mentioned this, I was talking about data centers for, I think last week, I was talking about data centers, the pros and cons. And President Trump, in his speech, talked about, understood by communicating that Americans are worried about their electric bills going up to support these giant plants, which are private operations. These are not government facilities. These data centers are a business, like somebody who built a shopping mall and you rent out space to tenants. Well, this is building a building, stuffing it full of hardware, turning it on with electricity, and then making data. And then, of course, somebody's going to buy the data, and that's the business model. The revenue is the sale of the data. The expenses is the cost of the building, the server, the electricity. And of course, the bottom line is to be positive. That's our hypothesis here at the Eastman Financial Report. Revenue minus expenses is income. If income's positive, divided by equity, it's return on equity. Divided by shares outstanding, it's earnings per share. That's the classic business model. Go to business school for 4 years. If you can come out and recite that in your sleep, your money was well, your tuition dollars were well spent. And if you went and studied under my classes, you can do that. But the point is, he was talking about the issue of electricity, and his comment was that he wants to make sure that the ratepayers don't see an increase in their electric rates, and that people who build these data centers should generate their own electricity. And that was an interesting comment because there's a whole lot behind that. Effectively, the states regulate utilities by law. The federal government regulates through the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, or the FERC. They deal with the interstate wheeling of power and interstate reliability issues, but they don't regulate the local generation, transmission, and distribution. Now, they will regulate interstate transmission lines, but that's a small subset. They also don't regulate the building of power plants unless it's a nuclear plant, because traditionally, since World War II, the federal government grants licenses to operate a nuclear plant, and they have some say. If you want to build yourself a nuclear plant, you're going to have to deal with the Federal Nuclear Regulatory Commission, or the NRC. Those are the two touch points where the federal government gets itself involved in local electric generation. So it is a very interesting comment, but it will be interesting to see how that works. Will you just allow them to build their own coal plant? There may be some blowback from the state and the NIMBYs and everybody who, the local community. Will you allow them to do maybe a natural gas plant? Well, you could do that, and there are interstate gas pipelines that flow, and FERC does regulate interstate gas, which is basically a siting issue. Or you could just drop a little nuke in the backyard there, but some of the neighbors may have something to say about that. So it'll be interesting to see how this works out. But the reason it caught my ear is because we are in the middle of a rather intense battle right now in Wisconsin with respect to the siting of a very large plant in the city of Port Washington, Wisconsin. It just happens to be in my home county here. And it's the plant's under construction. So it takes a long time to site generation, and it takes a long time to run transmission. And we'll see how the timing plays out. It's just remarkable that you'd think about building a capital-intensive plant. There's land, and then there's all sorts of buildings, and they have to be properly air-conditioned, and then they're chock-a-block full of electronic, I guess you could call them servers, it's computers, basically, that will take this raw data and crunch it into some usable data that somebody's going to pay for. That's the business model. And if you're going to build a plant and you don't know where the electricity is coming from, and there isn't a dedicated source of electricity, but you build the plant anyway, then from I guess a capitalist perspective, you'd ask the question, is that a good allocation of capital? Do you build a plant on speculation, not that somebody will buy the data, because somebody will buy the data, whatever data they're cranking and generating out of there. But the speculation is, can I get the inputs I need to make the data crunch? And that would be the equivalent of building an auto plant. And communities love to have auto plants. It makes lots of jobs and pays lots of taxes and enhances the reputation of the community. But you don't build an auto plant if there's no steel or vinyl or plastic to be had. You don't build an auto plant in a place where there's no labor, unless you're planning on developing subdivisions and housing, bringing people in. When you site plants, you tend to look at the cost of the inputs to make sure that there's enough input supply chain to make the plant economically viable. Otherwise, your cost to operate becomes excessive. If you don't have any steel for 1,500 miles away, and you have to ship it in, that shipping cost makes that plant less competitive than the plant they'd build next door to the steel plant. So the point is, when you're looking at these plants being developed, and I applaud President Trump for recognizing that this is a real touchstone with the American public. And his solution is great. We'll have them pay for their own generation and put it in. But the devil's always in the details on that. And it'll be interesting to see how that is accomplished. And we're all eagerly awaiting because if you were to build out the generating capacity to the levels these data centers need, you'd be doubling, in some instances even more, the amount of generating capacity. And if technology comes along, like software technology or quantum hardware technology comes along to make these plants obsolete, you have stranded costs on electric bills that will run for a very long time. Well, that's all I've got for today. We'll talk about other economic phenomenon starting tomorrow afternoon, but I will be back 11:30 to 12 Central Time, broadcasting from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Please go to worldviewfoundation.com and make a donation to help us in this ministry, and have a great afternoon. Thank you. Bye.